Okay everyone, here's a tough lesson. It's the adding and subtracting negative rational numbers lesson. Wow, that's a bit of a awkward title, isn't it? So, we've been avoiding this. When we did our fractions and decimals, I did cover how to multiply and divide negative fractions and negative decimals. It wasn't too bad, right? Like if you had negative 2 3/4 and you were multiplying by negative 3 1/2 and you have two negatives, you would have just said to yourself, well, two negatives make a positive, so I can just do the question normally and make my answer positive, no problem. And similarly, when we were doing decimals, I suppose, if we were doing negative 4.86 and we're going to divide that by positive 3.2, you'd say, well, there's one negative in this, only one. This is a positive, and one negative makes the answer negative. So I'll just divide this normally, do some long division, blah, 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 and then I'll make my answer negative. And, you know, that wasn't really a big issue either. But now we get to a bigger issue, and that's when you're trying to figure out questions like this one down here. So you have a negative 5.672 and a negative 0.88, and you're like, I don't know what to do here. Is the answer negative? Is the answer positive? How do I get? Look at this, negative 4/5 and minus 4. They can get pretty hard. So we're going to tackle those today. Alright, so to start, let's go through these four questions which look very similar but are obviously different. And I'm going to use the two questions that I introduced before when we were adding integers. Remember, I said I used two questions. The first question I ask is, what do I have more of, positives or negatives? And the second question I ask is, how many more? And we're going to see that one of those questions kind of fails today. So I'm going to introduce you to a new way of thinking of integers. Some of you already know this, I'm sure. So for example, the first question, positive 3 plus positive 5. So you have 3 positives here, and you have 5 positives here. So do you have more positives or more negatives? Well, obviously you have more positives. They're all positives. So we know right away our answer is going to be positive. You don't even need to put it down, but it's going to be positive. And how many? Now the second question is, how many more positives than negatives do you have? Well, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have no negatives, so there's no canceling out or anything. So you end up with positive 8 as your answer. I mean, you know that. 3 plus 5 is 8. I hope this isn't news to you. Okay, the second one. Again, we have 3 positives, but this time we have 5 negatives. So what do you have more of, positives or negatives? You have more negatives this time, don't you? So we know our answer is going to be negative because we have more negatives. Now, how many more negatives do we have? Well, 3 of those, 5 of those, we actually have 2 more negatives, don't we? If you don't understand that, I could cancel 3 of these out with 3 of these, and I'm left with 2 negatives. Okay, I know I'm going slow here, but I want to make sure everyone gets this. So the next one, 3 negatives and 5 positives. So what do you have more of, positives or negatives? You have more positives this time. The answer is going to be positive. And how many more do you have? Again, this time you could cancel out 3 negatives with 3 positives. You have 2 more positives than negatives. And the last one, we have 3 negatives, we have 5 more negatives. So what do you have more of, positives or negatives? You have more negatives because they're all negatives. How many more do you have? Well, you got these 3 and these 5. That's 8 total. There's no canceling out going on. Negative 8. Okay, so now we have our answers. I'm going to erase all this mess. So the question for you is, how did you determine the sign, whether it was positive or negative? Well, that was my first question we asked. I always ask, what do you have more of, positives or negatives, right? And whatever the answer is, that's going to be the sign. If there's more positives, like in the first one, it's going to be positive. If there's more negatives, right, 5 is more than 3, more negatives, it's going to be negative. And that's going to be the same for all the questions we do today. Okay, the second question, how to determine the numerical value, like how to figure out whether it's 8 or 2, basically. Because I want you to look, in all these questions you have a 3 and a 5, 3 and 5, 3 and 5, 3 and 5. And do you see in this question here and in this question here, the numerical value, like don't worry about the sign, the plus and minus. If you just look at the 8, how do you get the 8 if you look at the 3 and the 5 and then the 8 and the 3 and the 5 and then the 8? You added them together, didn't you? Whereas with these two, where you have the 3 and the 5 and the 3 and the 5, you didn't add them to get 8, you actually subtracted them to get 2 and 2. You did 5 minus 3 and 5 minus 3. I mean, I know you might not have thought of doing that, but it is one way of looking at this, and this is the way that's going to be more useful for what we're about to do today. So how do you know whether to add or whether to subtract? Well, look, for the ones that added, you had a positive 3 and a positive 5, and we added them together to get 8. And this one, we had a negative 3 and a negative 5, and we add them together 8. Oh, if the signs are the same, plus plus or minus minus, we add the numerical values together. So if the signs are the same, add. It's kind of like, you know, they're working together because they're the same sign to make it even bigger. You have two positives working together to get more positives. You have two negatives working together to get more negatives. But if the signs are different, they're kind of fighting against each other, they're canceling each other out, they're opposing each other, you actually end up subtracting. Plus and minus, positive and negative, subtract to get 2. Negative and positive, subtract to get 2. Okay, and I think this is the way that's going to help you do these really complicated questions like this. Now, what if it's a subtraction question? Well, that's easy. Just don't do it. Huh? What do I mean? Remember? You're going to add the opposite. So if you were doing, for example, a question like 4 take away negative 3, what we said is don't do that question. Add the opposite. So instead you're going to do 4, keep the first one the same, add, change the take away to an add, and the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. And answer that question instead. So that's going to be all our strategies here. So let's start. We better get going here. Okay. We're adding, so we don't need to change anything, right? It's not a subtraction question. Now, what do we have more of? Positives or negatives? Well, we have all these negatives, and we also have all these negatives. So we know for sure that our answer is going to be negative. Okay, now, what should I be doing with these two numbers? Should I be adding them or subtracting them? I know this is a bizarre question. People look at this and say, well, of course you're adding them together. But kind of not necessarily. I mean, look, this question right here, did we add 3 and 5 and get 8? No, we ended up with 2. Sometimes you kind of subtract. This is what's really confusing about this. So these signs are the same, negative, negative, and when the signs are the same, we add. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to add. So how do you add decimals? You line up the decimals. So forget about the negatives now. We know that our answer is going to be negative. So you write down the first one, and you line up the decimal. So we have 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 eighths. 1, 2, 3. Notice they're all lining up. 4, 5. Oh, we got some spaces here. Put some zeros in there, and we're going to add. So 0 and 8 is 8. 0 and 8 is 8. 2 and 8 is 10. Carry the 1. 1 plus 7 is 8 plus 8 is 16. Carry the 1. 1 plus 6 is 7. Plus 8 is 15. Carry the 1. 1 and 5 is 6. And the decimal, straight down. Don't forget, you said your answer would be negative, so put a negative on it, and you are done. Okay, subtraction question here. We don't want to subtract, we want to add the opposite. So here's my new question. I keep the first one the same. I change it to an addition question. Now, this number right here was 5, 6, or positive 5, 6. So my new number should be negative 5, 6. That's the opposite. So look, I have two negatives. What do I have more of, positives or negatives? Well, obviously negatives, because they're all negatives. So again, I know my answer is going to be negative. And what am I going to do with the values here? Add them or subtract them? Well, the signs are the same, negative and negative, so I have to add them again. I'm adding 4/5 and 5/6. How do I do that? When you add fractions, you need a common denominator. Common denominator of 5 and 6 is 30. So I'm going to get something over 30 plus something over 30. What do I multiply this 5 by? I multiply it by 6. What do I multiply this 4 by? Also multiply by 6. What do you do the bottom? Do the top. What do I multiply 6 by? 5. Do the same to the top. Now again, don't worry about the negative. We've dealt with that when we decided the answer is going to be negative. So 5 times 6 is 30, 4 times 6 is 24, 6 times 5 is 30, 5 times 5 is 25. And we can add these together. Keep the denominator the same. 24 plus 25 is 49. And remember, our answer is negative. So negative 49 over 30 is great, or switch it to negative 1. 30 goes into 49 one time, and 19 are left over. So 19 over 30. And there you go. Okay, next one is just a positive plus another positive. What do you have more of? Positives, of course. So our answer is going to be positive. Should you be adding or subtracting? Well, they're both positive, so you should be adding. Come on, this is just a regular fraction question. I don't even know why I put this on here. I'm going to do this really fast. I'm not going to switch this to improper. What's the lowest common denominator of 10 and 5? It's 10. So you should have 2 and something over 10 plus 8 and something over 10. Well, the first one's already 9 over 10. What do I have to multiply the 5 by? 2. Do the same to the top. So you end up with 5 times 2 is 10 and 4 times 2 is 8. Add the big numbers together, 2 plus 8, and you get 10. Add the fractions together, 9 tenths plus 8 tenths. Well, 9 plus 8 is 17, and the denominator stays the same. Is that good? No, it's not, because this is an improper fraction, right? 17 over 10 is the same as 1 and 7 tenths. So really what we have is 10 plus 1 and 7 tenths. Well, 10 plus 1 is 11, and we still have our 7 tenths, and we said the answer was positive, so we're done. Okay, this one is a subtraction question. We do not want to subtract, we want to add the opposite. So don't make any decisions until you change it into an adding question. So I'm going to keep the plus, or positive, 0.00032. I'm going to change this to an addition question, and I'm going to do the opposite of negative 2.9999, which is positive 2.9999. Hey, look, it's another question where you have a positive added to a positive. This is just like a regular old question with no negatives in it. Obviously you have more positives, so your answer is going to be positive. And since they're the same sign, positive and positive, you're going to add. So we write down the first number, 0.00032. We're going to line up the decimal, so we'd have 29999. We can fill in this space with a 0, and we said we're adding. So 2 plus 0 is 2, 3 plus 9 is 12, carry the 1, 1 plus 0 plus 9 is 10, carry the 1, 1 plus 0 plus 9 is 10, carry the 1, 1 plus 0 plus 9 is 10, carry the 1, 1 plus 7 plus 2 is 10, carry the 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. Now, I'm getting a little sloppy here. Look, it's not clear where I'm putting the decimal. If I go straight down, it lands right here. So somewhere along here, I was going too fast. It goes right there. I mean, if I got confused, I could just look at this. It's 17 point something, 2 point something. 17 plus 2 is 19. It needs to be somewhere around 19. So it makes sense it would be 20.002. But I am getting a little sloppy there, and I apologize. All right, the answer is positive, so we don't need to do anything. We're done. So this is an adding question, so we're not going to change anything. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? You have negative 24 and a few more, but negative 24 negatives and 1.225 positives. You have more negatives, don't you? So we know our answer is going to be negative. Now, should we be adding or subtracting in this question? Well, look, we have different signs. One's a negative, one's a positive. They're going to be battling it out here, weakening each other. You've got to subtract. So actually what I'm going to do in this question is 24.7 take away, I know it's an addition question, but you got to take away the 1.225. How do we take away? Line up the decimal again. So 1.225, put some zeros in here, and we are subtracting. 0 take away 5, can't do. 0 take away 2, can't do. Borrow from the 7, it becomes a 6, and this becomes 10. But we got to borrow from that, it becomes 9, and this becomes 10. 10 minus 5 is 5, 9 minus 2 is 7, 6 minus 2 is 4, 4 minus 1 is 3, and then we still got the 2. Decimal goes straight down, and we said the answer is going to be negative, and there we go. Okay, here's a subtraction question. We don't want to subtract. Keep the first one the same, change your subtraction into an addition, and the opposite of this is positive 3 7/9. So what do you have more of, negatives or positives? Well, you got 5 negatives and more, and you got 3 positives and more. 5's bigger, you have more negatives. We know our answer is going to be negative. Should we be adding or subtracting? Well, we have different signs. We have a minus sign, a negative sign, and we have a positive sign. So they're different, which means you're going to subtract. You want me to do this improper, or do you want me to keep it mixed? I'll go improper this time. So I'm going to switch this. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17 over 3. And this one, 3 times 9 is 27, plus 7 is 34 over 9. And remember, we said we have to subtract them because the signs are different. So this is the actual question we're going to do, and then we'll make it negative after. Okay, we need common denominators. Common denominator of 3 and 9 is 9. So it's going to be like this, and we already have 34 here. What do I have to multiply the 3 by? by 3, do the same to the top. 3 times 3 is 9, perfect, and 17 times 3 is 51. And now we can get our answer. Denominator stays the same. 51 minus 34 is 17, and remember, we said it would be negative. Okay, and we could write that in mixed form. 9 goes into 17 one time, with 8 left over, and we have the same denominator as before. Don't forget, if it was negative here, it's also negative here. Either one of these answers work. So this one's an adding question, so we don't have to change anything. What do you have more of, positives or negatives? Well, you have 7 positives and 8 negatives, so you have more negatives. Our answer is going to be negative. Should I add or subtract? Well, this is a positive 7, if there's no sign it's positive, and this is a negative 8. Those signs are different. We have to subtract. Okay, here's a problem people do all the time. They figure out you have to subtract, which is great, and they try to answer this question right here. Do you see what's wrong about that? Because now you're going to go down into the negatives, and you're going to end up with like negative negatives, or what exactly does this mean? No, you always want to take the bigger amount and subtract the smaller amount. 8 is bigger, so you actually want to do 8 3/4 take away 7 4/5. This is the question that you need to answer here. Okay, I'm going to do this one by keeping it mixed. So what's our lowest common denominator, 4 and 5? It's 20. So 8 and something over 20 minus 7 and something over 20. Multiply this by 5 and this by 5. 4 times 5 is 20, 3 times 5 is 15. And then multiply this by 4 and this by 4. So 5 times 4 is 20 and 4 times 4 is 16. Do you have to borrow in this question? Yes, you do, because you can't do 15 minus 16 without going into the negatives, and we don't want to do that. So we borrow from the 8, it becomes a 7. And remember, we add these two numbers together. 20 plus 15 is 35. Now you can actually get your answer. 7 minus 7 is 0. Don't put the 0. Okay, it looks weird to have a mixed fraction with like 0 and 2/3. That's weird. So don't do that. Just leave the 0. And what you end up with is 35/20 minus 16/20. Well, the denominator stays the same, and 35 minus 16 is 19. Was our answer positive or negative? It was negative. So there we go. Okay, I might make this the last one because it's just taking too long here. I think you get the idea. I hope. We'll do some order of operations in the next video anyway. Okay, this is a subtraction question. We want to raise an addition question. So we keep the first one the same, 91.992. If you want, you can slap a positive on it. I'll even put it in brackets. Now, I don't want to subtract. I want to add, and I have to do the opposite of 163. Well, the opposite of 163 is negative 163. So, what do you have more of, positives or negative? You have 91 positives, 163 negatives. It's negative. Again, I think I've done a few too many negatives, but that's okay. So, should we add or subtract? Well, this is positive, this is negative. Those are opposite signs. They're fighting against each other. So we got to subtract here. Now again, don't go 91 minus 163 and end up in the negatives and get all confused. Take the bigger amount, which is 163. I mean bigger amount when you ignore the signs. I know that positive 91 is more than negative 163, but we're just looking at the numerical values, the 163 and the 91, and 163 is bigger. So we're going 163 minus the 91.992. We're going to do that and then make it negative, and we'll be done. So how do we subtract decimals? We line up the decimals. So we have 163, where's the decimal? Right here at the end of the number. And then we have 91.992. We've got 3 empty spaces here. Oh, we've got a lot of borrowing to do. We want to go 0 minus 2, can't do it, so we've got to borrow all the way over here from the 3, which becomes a 2. This becomes 10. Can't do it, got to borrow, and it becomes 10 here. Can't do it, borrow, becomes 10 here. And finally, we can actually do this. 10 minus 2 is 8. 9 minus 9 is 0. 9 minus 9 is 0. 2 minus 1 is 1. Oh, can't do this. We got to borrow. So we borrow from the 1, and this becomes 16. 16 minus 9 is 7. And we're done. Oh, we're not done. Move the decimal straight down, and we said our answer would be negative, and we're finished. All right, everyone. You can do it. Let me know if you need any help. See you later. Bye.